A very good morning, a very good afternoon, a very good evening for some of you joining us today, and very privileged to be with you this afternoon in our part of the world, and a great privilege to be presenting to you some very exciting guests later on in the program, just to appreciate you making the time to be with us today. I know it's difficult times in some parts of the world, but for us, we're grateful. We've received a lot of rain, more than we have expected, and God has been kind and good to us, certainly. Before we begin, I would welcome you to throw in the comment section, just tell us where you are joining us from, just to get a sense that we're not speaking to ourselves here. Comment section, please type in where you are joining us from. Just type in your location, anything exciting, how your day is going. We want to hear from you, and we would love to throw in some of your locations on the screen just to get a sense of where we are, who we have on the stream tonight. Come on, let's have that. And before we see your comments and where you're coming from, allow me to recognize, as has been our tradition, to appreciate our church treasurer of the month. Each month we recognize someone who is within our team of volunteer church treasurers who is doing great work. And this month it gives me great pleasure to recognize Mrs. Ethel Ncube, Mom Ncube, and the Maranatha Main SDA Church Treasury team, the team that she works with to deliver a great service, not only to the church members, but also to us, because we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for volunteers like Mrs. Ncube. She's one of our senior church treasurers, and we want to take this opportunity to appreciate her and the team and the work they're doing, and to trust and place them in God's hands, believing that they'll continue to do a great job for the Master. So, Mam Ncube, thank you so much. We recognize the work you do, and we are grateful for all your efforts. Thank you so much. And back to our normal stream, just to see in our comments, we've got Sindiso Ndlovu from Burnside. I only seem to have one comment, but I can see we have quite a number of people who've logged in. Please just throw in your comments and let us know where you are joining us from. So with that, allow me to introduce you to our guests this afternoon. One of them is going to be joining us shortly, but at the moment I'm happy to introduce you to two of our three guests. I'll just put them on the screen and then tell you a little about them before they introduce themselves. The first guest is Elder Rodney Brady. He is the Chief Financial Officer of the South Pacific Division. I will be showing you shortly where, what the South Pacific Division consists of. And we also have Christina Hawkins, the South Pacific Division. In our language, we would call her the Stewardship Director, but she will tell us how it's configured in that part of the world. Just to welcome you and appreciate you for joining us this afternoon. And I've got just a couple of slides just to show the people before I let you speak. If you can give me that opportunity. The first one is a picture of Elder Rodney Brady on the left with some of our team members. What people may need to know, and it's critical that this be said, that we owe a lot to the South Pacific Division. We experienced great hospitality last year. That's myself and two of our CFOs and our Assistant Financial Officer at a conference that was hosted by the SPD Treasury for all the members of the Treasury team in that division. A fantastic opportunity that we had hosted by Elder Brady and his team. So we just want to appreciate. And what you see on the right, that's Elder Brady in his office, showing us some great information that has been of great use to us since we've been back. So, Elder Brady, we want to give you your roses while you're still here. Thank you so much. We really sincerely appreciate everything you did for us and the great hospitality while we're over there. And Christina, you're not spared. I have to throw in this picture. Christina, out of her pocket, took us out for an Italian meal. And thank you so much, Christina. That was a memorable evening with the team. And there's a lady there who actually works in New Zealand as part of the Treasury team in New Zealand who was with us. She's from Zimbabwe, so it was great for you to host us there. And we appreciate that. And maybe, Christina, just to recognize that you are responsible for this. That's an Australian staple. It's non-alcoholic for those who may be concerned. Very non-alcoholic. It's a ginger beer that we were introduced by Christina. And just before we left, we had to get a little crate, Christina, against all the sensible advice about carrying carbonated drinks in our luggage. But that was you. But that's just to appreciate the great hospitality that we got and from the South Pacific Division. So with that, allow me to let you introduce yourselves briefly, just if I've missed anything out, and especially you, Christina, as well. If you can just tell us how, your title as it is understood in that part of the world. So Rodney, Elder Brady, please let us know. Thank you for having. Thank you for joining us today.
It's a pleasure, and thank you for including me. What you didn't state as well is that before that, we'd actually visited your union a couple of years ago as well from our division.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
Coming up and some of the locations brings back a lot of good memories. And we likewise, you learnt from us, but we learnt a lot more from you from our time there. And it's actually quite interesting what we did learn, because one of our territories, Papua New Guinea, has got a lot of similarities to Zimbabwe. And we've actually used some of the learnings of how the church is run in Zimbabwe for some recommended changes in Papua New Guinea. So we want to appreciate the learnings that you've given us, because it's very, very practical. And that's, I think, the marvelous of these sort of forums is we get to share with each other. We can learn from each other. Nothing is that unique. That's where I think it's great that you've provided these opportunities. But about myself, as you said, I'm the Chief Financial Officer for the South Pacific Division. I've been doing that role now for over 20 years, which is a long time. And our division is fairly unique in the way that it operates. It has a big institutional base as far as operations of hospitals, health food factories, and a very diversified membership, which you may talk about later. So we have to juggle all that within our division, and our role as division administration is to keep all those pieces moving together. It's a very challenging area. Oh, you've got the picture up there of the division. I can just give you an explanation there. Hopefully most people will know where Australia is. You just keep going east from Zimbabwe and you'll hit Australia. And our territory is mainly water, as you can see. We have got the two financial backbones of the division are Australia and New Zealand, but the majority of our membership is in the smaller islands in the South Pacific. Over 80% of our membership is there. Many of it, that's where our growth and membership is on it. But the resources are really within Australia and New Zealand, and we can talk about that a little bit later. In our division, the division operates a very extensive school system. It's a major education system. We operate a health network of clinics in the Pacific. We've got hospitals, 3 tertiary institutions that are operated throughout the Pacific as well too. So we've got Avondale College and Australia. So we've got a lot of pieces that we juggle in the South Pacific, and we can talk more later about that.
Fantastic. Thanks for that intro. I hadn't actually thought about it as just going east and you end up in Australia, but that's exactly what it is.
We are your nearest neighbour, like in that respect. Once you leave,
in that respect, you're right. Fantastic. Christina, do you want to tell us everything that I left out? And by the way, your time here was well appreciated, although we kind of missed each other briefly. but we heard a lot of about your tour of duty in Zimbabwe while you're here. So it's fantastic that you can join us, Elder Brady. Christina?
Yes, so my role is stewardship director, but I sit within the discipleship ministries team. So I'm not a department by myself. I report to a leader who's got about 8 of us, and together all the departmental ministries have been integrated into one team. So my colleagues are personal ministries, Sabbath school, youth, children's ministries, health, family ministries. We all sit together. And we still retain our focus area on our department or our ministry specialty, but we are firstly united on how do we help to shift the culture of the church to embrace more of Jesus' methods of disciple making, to cultivate movement building to achieve our vision, which is to see a thriving disciple making movement across the Pacific, and to facilitate and foster church planting. So I do still do that from a stewardship perspective, but foremostly we make a contribution to that big initiative that we're united in. So we try and wear the 2 hats together. So we try and contribute to the movement building perspective, but include the departmental focus of stewardship or youth ministries or children's ministries into that. So I hope that summarises it.
Well, I mean, it sounds like it's more holistic. It's more sort of less of a silo approach, so that each one's kind of beating their own drum, as opposed to, you know, where sometimes you can have all these little pieces that aren't quite gelling together. So I did find that very fascinating, and something that we hope to transition to even in this part of the world. When we did our intros, Kevin Jackson hadn't joined us, and rightly so, because you probably took a nap, Kevin, and you were going to wake up tomorrow if it weren't for this live cast. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah. No, thank you. No, we actually had some visitors that we were trying to show the door.
Politely. Yeah, politely so. But we appreciate you joining us. And maybe for those who don't know, Kevin Jackson's the Chief Executive Officer of Sanitarium. What's the rest of it, Kevin? It's wellness and health. What? I know we have the sanitarium, but there's a little piece more. Just tell us a bit more.
Yeah, Sanitarium Health and Wellbeing. So
health and well-being. Okay. And while we were there, during one of the lunch times, Elder Brady took us out to a local supermarket. So for people who need an appreciation, those are some of the products that Sanitarium makes. You will see your Marmite, your Wheat Bix. I see some peanut butter, and even what we have, some So Good. We have So Good soy milk in our part of the world. So people will recognize that. And yeah, and a lot of stuff that we couldn't imagine was, done by a facility that is part of our church network. So that was very eye-opening. And it's great to have you here. Do you want a few words, Kevin?
Sure. Well, thank you for the introduction, and it's good to share this time with you. And even though we're on the other side of the world, and it's a fairly crazy time in the world at the moment, isn't it? But it's good to be able to still connect with God's family around the world.
100%. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'll go straight to Elder Brady. Before we were even talking about COVID, we were talking about wildfires in Australia. I remember seeing pictures of smoke over, the Sydney Harbour, surreal. And I remember when I was there, I took a train out to Bungendore to see a friend of mine, an old schoolmate of mine. And he had, kangaroos in the front. And he then sent a picture of all that we had seen in smoke. And then, as if that wasn't enough, COVID kicks in. So please tell us how that has played out in your part of the world, having those two body blows on a year like this?
Yeah, it's interesting. It depends on what effect it is. There's been a big impact on society, as you can imagine. It's been a major disruptor. Within our church scene, it has been a major disruptor. The fire's not so much across the place, but COVID has had a major impact. Since March, many of our churches have been closed. In some areas, they're only just going back now. Schools have been disrupted, so we haven't been immune from it. But Australia and New Zealand and many of our Pacific countries have taken a fairly stringent approach to just shutting down functions and locking down areas that have been impacted. So that affects us as a church. The churches for us are starting to reopen in some areas, but there's space requirements that needed. We're not allowed to sing in church. We can't collect offerings because you can't pass an offering plate around. I know at our church, they have to wipe down all the pews afterwards. After Sabbath school, we have to wipe down our seats. So it's a very different environment. We're not allowed to shake hands. We've got to keep 1.5 meters from each other. And so a church that I go to that probably seats a few hundred people, we only can fit 85 people in there. That's just being relaxed. And now we can fit about 170. But this has had a major impact. And churches in some ways claim they've been more disadvantaged because the hotels and entertainment industry has been able to have more freedoms than churches. So that's something that has given us pause for thought and just thinking in how society does it. Like we can have people on dance floors standing around drinking together, but going to churches. And I think we've got to be aware of all these subtleties and what effect that has on church and worship and what's happening in society. For us financially, though, your interest is there. What's interesting is that what we have seen in our division repeatedly is that whenever we have major disasters, it seems that our members get a wake-up call. They find out what's important. They suddenly realise that the value of money is not what they thought it would be and that they need to be thinking about more spiritual things. After the wildfires that we had at the beginning of the year, one of the conferences most impacted was in the bottom of New South Wales, where they'd had most of it, and they saw a rapid increase in tithe. And they'd just been through a major drought. So there was major farming drought they'd been under. Then they have the bushfires and tithe leaps up. And that's not a surprise to us because we've seen it time and time again. Places like Vanuatu, when they have a natural disaster of a cyclone, tithe jumps up. So it's actually an interesting phenomenon. Now we're seeing with COVID, when COVID hit with churches shut, March and April, we started to see tithes and offerings drop very dramatically. And Christina can talk about why, because people weren't meeting in person, our collection methods, we saw tithe drop dramatically. And that had people very, very worried. And that's what you're seeing there. You'll see that our experience to April, you can see all those red marks on how much the tithe was down on the same time the previous years. This is at the end of April. And for us, that in our dollars was $4.8 million down on the same time the year before. But as the year's gone on, and I think Christina will expand on the journey, you can see there that tithe is actually now up across the division. So we've gone from being minus 10% down to plus 5% up, and that's $5.3 million more than the same time last year. So we praise God about that. We do see, we don't take it for granted. We do affirm our members, and we appreciate God's leading and providence at this time. So while many areas may be distressed, we do see the spirituality of our people at this time is remaining faithful. And I think it's an interesting journey of stewardship that's happened this year. But I just, as a treasurer, I rejoice because we started back in March, April. Treasurers' knees were starting to shake a little bit with fear when they saw what was happening. And as the year's gone on, we've seen God has sustained us. And so now we are rejoicing as we get to the end of the year. We know that there's still a journey to go, but we do know God cares for his church.
That's an awesome testimony, especially coming from a CFO, because you know, we tend to be very cautious about numbers, but I mean, to hear you speak with that amount of conviction, I'm sure is very reassuring and a testimony of what God can do and continues to do as we go into 2021. I just wanted to jump over to Kevin, just to change gears a little bit. I mean, I did show the products that Sanitarium makes early on. Do you want to tell us a bit more about what you actually do? I think mine is a very simplistic way of showing what you do. If you can tell us a bit more.
Yeah, look, I think you've taken some great shots of some of the products that we have in the market there. So, I suppose if you go right back to the beginning, we started in 1898, and it was really under the inspiration of Ellen White, who came to Australia in the early 1890s and started to talk about health and health reform, and so the interest within the church membership grew quite significantly as a result of that in adopting a more healthy lifestyle. And at the same time, in Battle Creek in Michigan, John Harvey Kellogg was developing some foods for the patients in that, and so one of the workers from the Battle Creek immigrated to Australia, and quite soon after started to produce products in one of our cities, Melbourne. And since then, I suppose the organisation has grown, and so primarily in the past we've been a breakfast cereal manufacturer, and from a volume perspective, we are the leading manufacturer in Australia and New Zealand on breakfast cereals. And in Australia, we have the top two brands in that category, being Weet-Bix and Up and Go. And I think this is very similar to the Weet-Bix that exists in South Africa, and I think is available in Zimbabwe as well. But outside of that, more recently, in the 1980s, we started to produce beverages, and so we now have a very strong beverage business in non-dairy beverages like soy and almond, oat, along with one of the breakfast products is a liquid breakfast product, which is sort of all of the similar nutrition to what you would get in a cereal, a bowl of cereal, in a liquid form overall. So if you think about how much we make today, we produce about 2 million Weet-Bix a day, in Australia, and if you were to take our annual production of Weet-Bix and line them up end to end, they would extend about 3.5 times around the equator. So that sort of gives you a little bit of a perspective of the volume of Weet-Bix that we make. And in terms of beverages, we produce about 50 Olympic-sized swimming pools worth of beverages every year for our market as well. But on top of that, we do a range of meals. You had some photos there of the meat substitute range that we produce, and we're the market leader in that space as well. Yes, you can see them there. That's a good shot. And we do other products like prepared meals and soups, tofus, and the like. And this is an area, this whole area of veganism or vegetarianism is growing rapidly globally at the moment. It's a very, very fast growing area as more and more people recognize the impacts on the environment that dairy has and meat has overall. And so it's good to be in a space that's growing, and God has certainly blessed our business across our history and continues to bless it today.
Wow. Thanks for that intro with respect to what products Sanitarium actually makes. And maybe just a quick add-on question. We know the Weet-Bix that we see here, we see the So Good. What's the relationship between, say, Sanitarium on your end and what we see here?
Yes, we do have a relationship with the South African business that makes the Weet-Bix product. In fact, if you go right back in history, it was the same individual that started manufacturing a Weet-Bix. He shifted to South Africa and started up production in South Africa, and that business became Bocomo Foods. ultimately based out of South Africa, and subsequently that was purchased by Pioneer Foods, which is a large South African foods as well. And of course, Pepsi have actually just recently, as in last year, bought Pioneer Foods over. So we have a strategic relationship with Pioneer Foods. We actually license our flake biscuit, our Weet-Bix production technology to them, and we have a very close working relationship with that organisation in South Africa.
So maybe jumping over to Christina, the way I understand it, I mean, Sanitarium gives a lot of what it makes to the church. And I mean, just from what we got, it's, without actually throwing numbers around, it must be a significant amount of resources that are channeled to the church. So what happens in terms of the mindset of church members with respect, knowing that there's this amount of resource coming to the church? Do people kind of feel like, okay, so we don't really have to give anything to the church is making a whole lot of money? What is the perspective of membership in view of this great resource?
I guess we've got, over 100 years of history with Sanitarium and the church here in this country. So it's probably something that we don't celebrate enough of, because it's been with our history for the entire history of the church here in Australia. Certainly member engagement is really, really important. So it's probably not an area that we talk about a lot. We know as leaders that member engagement and participation and ways that members can be part of the mission directly is the most important thing. And so we keep very focused on that. There's no doubt that our church members feel a very strong identity and a very warm relationship to Sanitarium. But I think the thing to remember the most is that the basic function of ministry in Australia and the South Pacific is still funded by tithe. So tithe is still the most significant and is still the basic funding of ministry. So our conferences and our missions are totally, their scale, their capacity is dependent on tithe, completely and utterly. So in many ways, it feels just like the church in any other part of the world. The difference is that we have some of our institutions like our higher education, our hospital, and our media. That's where the difference is because of Sanitarium's relationship with us. But for the basic function of ministry, the most important unit of ministry being the local church, the employment of pastors, our structures of conferences and unions, it's still fundamentally tithe. So there's no difference to how it feels for you. So self-reliant conferences, helping missions to develop to conferences from being missions that need appropriations, that's still just as critical for us. That still results as much effort as you have to put in from us too.
Thanks for that clarity. But nevertheless, I'm sure Sanitarium is a blessing to the church, which we do appreciate as well from here. And maybe back to Elder Brady. The one thing that we took away from your territory, which ties in nicely with what we've been talking about this afternoon, is the manner in which the church leverages financial opportunities with mission. You took us to some property developments, I think close to Avondale, and just listening to you talk about how you moved that from something that was kind of like a backwater to a very thriving property development. I mean, just to mention a few, how have you managed to come up with such a robust approach to leveraging opportunities for the church?
I think it goes back a long way. It goes back, as Christina says, going back into our history, the way that things have been managed in the past. And many of us now, through good management, are getting to deal with some of the things like the property. So we have people that look at opportunities to see what is around. And so different opportunities come up. And we have a good governance system that allows that. We have a lot of professional input from people. and we have a lot of service areas that care for it. So when it comes to property, we actually have a service area that cares and manages for it. So it doesn't get mixed up with the local church operations. We let local churches do what they do best, and we have other areas for either insurance or other activities to care for their areas. So they look after it in those ways.
Okay, and maybe if you can just unpack further, because one of the things that I took away, particularly from your office, was the idea of you how should I put it, creating these teams, these project teams that kind of take it away from you, and then you just keep making sure you're focused on the core business. Do you want to speak to that?
That's right. We have different boards and functions. Like within the division, we have leaders that are empowered to care for specific areas. We have the majority of the people at the division actually care for a lot of the service areas of the church, whether that be within investments or property, insurance, computers, IT areas, and we have managers care for those. So those managers have boards and management structures to support them. So they are able to operate and function, and we keep them all tied together with strategy. So they unite with strategy, and they look at then how can they maximise either the assets or opportunities for mission for the church. Now, mission for the church can take on many dimensions. One, it can be the provision of funding to do mission, or it can be the way we do mission in the way that it's actually performed. And if you look at something like you've just asked Kevin with sanitarium, a lot of people think of sanitarium, oh yeah, it makes money. Sanitarium was never set up to make money. It was set up to educate people on a healthy lifestyle. And so for us, a lot of our health work ministry is actually what sanitarium does for us. Like it influences the national agenda on health. It does all sorts of things. So it's more than just a business to sanitarium. And that's what we also want our other enterprises to be that we do as well. They've got to be sort of looking at how they actually work together to either provide resources or provide the methods to do mission.
That takes me very nicely to my next question for Kevin before I jump on to the one for Christina. Just what Elder Brady's just said, he did make it very clear about the mission component of sanitarium when we're there. I think he was mentioning one of your team members who's been very useful in leveraging his private sector experience into initiatives for mission. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that side of what sanitarium does in terms of the mission element?
Yeah, sure. Certainly, as Rod's mentioned, that's a very critical part of what we do and who we are, and that's our fundamental purpose. In fact, if you look at our purpose statement as an organisation, it says changing lives every day through whole person health. And so we see our mission as far broader than just providing healthy foods. We're actually holding people's hands on a journey towards healthy living and healthy lifestyles overall. And so we see that mandate, that mission is very broad. So it can cover things such as advocating to government on the dietary guidelines for the country, or food labelling, or what ingredients are good or not good for people and to consume in the community overall. And we have an active part of that. But beyond that, we also have a very active role in educating health professionals and providing them information. And we have a very, very significant community presence as well. Not only directly with the community through partnerships with people like Food Bank, which distributes to about 2,500 charities across Australia and New Zealand, to the Red Cross, and we run a whole range of different food security programs in schools across Australia and New Zealand. We run something called a kids triathlon program, and this is where we encourage kids to be physically active and to get out and try and challenge themselves to do physical activity. And we have a massive response to that every year. I think last year we put about 60,000 kids through that program, and it is actually the largest kids program of its type in the world. And so if you look at some of those things that we do, and there's multifaceted different ways that we support the community overall, but just in the last 12 months, we've provided probably around 13 million serves of food directly into our community to those pockets of need that we see, whether it be the bushfire victims to people impacted by COVID, to schools, to homeless shelters, or through the charities that get distributed to from the food bank relationship that we have. So this mission orientation is front and center to who we are and what we do as an organisation.
Fantastic. And I mean, I saw it firsthand. It's interesting when you see sanitarium in the marketplace, when you see it as part of all the various brands that you and then to actually come across it, on a billboard or on, and in television and things like that. And it's something that we aspire to do in this part of the world, because like what Elder Brady was saying, it's such a game changer in helping that awareness, giving another perspective of the church that we wouldn't otherwise have if you weren't in the marketplace. So you're appreciated as far as that goes.
I think also, can I just add something there? I think one thing it does help as well is that Sanitarium is clearly a Christian organisation, but it doesn't have to be second rate. And, and I think that's one thing as Christians we should aspire to when we're serving the community or doing whatever. We should be very proud to be operating at a high standard. And I think this year we actually see continually Sanitarium recognised as a leader in many areas. So it's good to have something that's values-based and not having to compromise performance because of that. And Kevin, you might want to share, this year you've had some more recognition again this year to give the standing that Sanitarium has in the general community, not just the church.
Yeah, we've had a number of community awards and industry awards this year. Most recently, just a couple of weeks ago, we were awarded the Supplier of the Year out of all suppliers to the grocery industry in Australia. So that's the first time we've actually been awarded that award, and it was a fantastic achievement for the team overall. And as Rod said, it recognises that we have a standard of excellence, but in doing that, we don't compromise our values either. And the industry recognises that and appreciates that we have a highly ethical approach to the way that we do business.
Fantastic. Just to head over to Christina, and this question I think will kind of dovetail with one that I have for Elder Brady, in terms of if we throw the map of the SPD territory again, you've got Australia, New Zealand, but then you've got Papua New Guinea and Samoa, Vanuatu, Fiji, and so many others, which effectively is having the first world. Well, that's not a good, people don't like those terms, first world, third world, but I'm saying effectively having developed nations and developing nations side by side within your territory. How do you manage to how do you blend the two? Maybe if that makes any sense, and how does that look like? Because obviously some of your members are able to do that much more for the church. I do appreciate that 10% of whatever of your increase is still 10%, but at the end of the day, you have these kind of perspectives at the table. If I can have both of you maybe weighing in on that.
So as Rod mentioned earlier, we have more members in the Pacific nations and emerging economies than we do have in Australia and New Zealand. We have massive secular populations in our big cities in Australia and New Zealand with very few Adventists. So we have some big missional challenges and some big resource challenges. And Rod can correct me or not, but I think we have the greatest economic diversity compared to other parts of the world church within this division. So it is challenging, but it's not impossible, and actually brings us many opportunities we've really enjoyed great connectivity between Australians and New Zealanders in the Pacific Islands. Australians and New Zealanders love the Pacific Islands. There's a real warmth there. During when it wasn't COVID, a lot of Australians and New Zealanders travelled to the Pacific Islands. We've got a long history as an Adventist church of having mission in the Pacific Islands and been sending missionaries to the Pacific Islands since early 1900s. There's an incredible amount of warmth and really good relationships between us and a lot of connectivity. So it's been a very reciprocal, warm relationship for a long time. Our messages in stewardship are the same whether we're in a village that has no formal wages or income coming in, where people are growing and selling at the markets what they have. The message is the same. God is still first. So whether you are getting a crop of cow from the ground or you're earning a formal wage as a teacher in Melbourne, when you get that increase in income, that whole thing of putting God first and returning to him what is his, whether that's through a tithe house in returning some of your crops or giving of your wage, it's the same concept. So it's learning to trust in God's provision and protection and returning to him what is his, trusting that he's going to bless you abundantly with what you have remaining and that he's going to continue to provide for you. So the stewardship messages remain the same. The mechanisms and the ways people contribute is, of course, different. But I've noticed something, and I've travelled a lot in the last 5 years, and particularly before COVID, and that is that God's promises are true. And just like in Corinthians, it says that God will give you the resources to be generous whenever he needs you to be. I've found that whether a member is in Manus Island or Melbourne, they are equipped perfectly to be generous within their context and to help where society needs the most help in their context. It looks different, of course, but God is faithful in still resourcing his people for the purpose he has.
Fantastic. And I'm sure you have one of the most exciting jobs in your capacity, in stewardship and discipleship, coming up with platforms and mechanisms that can speak to, this wide spectrum of diverse people groups and looking for that success. But I like how the bottom line is still the same. The fact that it's faithfulness and putting God first in context. And Elder Brady, in the same token, maybe from an administrative perspective, how do you balance those voices at the table?
Yeah, that's always a challenge. I think Christina has outlined it well, the long history of sharing and trust that exists between the different places. There's a very strong relation. I think to balance, the first thing you've got to have is trust and understanding between the different cultures and nations. And I think we've got a history of doing that. You'll always have your typical little rivalries because, that's just human nature. But at the same time, everybody is pretty united and understanding and supportive of each other. We celebrate our differences. We understand that we're not all the same, but we're able to function. And it's actually a miracle. I look at the diversity of what's there. I'll just show you a couple of graphs to help illustrate one of the issues and how we do it. There's one with two pie charts there on SPD tithe versus membership. This is very telling. They talk about the 80-20 rules. And the 80-20 rule, if you look at within the total tithe that's collected across the division, the blue is where we've got 75% of our tithe coming from our union conferences, which is basically Australia and New Zealand. The red area, 25% of tithe, comes from where our Pacific membership. Now, if you go to the one on the right, you'll see there where the membership is, and you can see that the membership of 15% is where 75% of the tithe income is sourced from. And that's very interesting because you can actually see we've got the people where more people where there's less resources. How do we deal with that? Go to the other slide that's got a graph on it that shows the tithe per member, and you can see that there's another one after that one there. That gives a diversity of a tithe per member between our membership in Australia and New Zealand compared to the Pacific. And Christina said you can see the diversity that exists there. And that's quite enormous of what it does. But at the end of the day, things are financed and run in local economies. Now, if you looked at typically how people may think, the people in the Pacific may think they have less money, lower incomes, and always be expecting more support, which typically has gone. Australia and New Zealand, through its resources, has helped the Pacific tremendously and still does. But when we look at a mission opportunity in our division, and under the General Conference, they're talking about mission to the cities. In our division, over half the population of people in this division live in just 5 cities. Yet only about 8% of our membership is in those same areas. So you can see our biggest mission opportunity is those major cities. Now, a lot of work's being done in the Pacific, where we have very high concentration of members now. We've got typically throughout many of our nations, Solomons, Papua New Guinea, other places, 1 in 7 or 1 in 10 people in those countries will be Adventist. If we go to places like Papua New Guinea, which is about 6-7 million people, on the books we have about 250,000-300,000 people that are members, but when they do the national census, over 1 million people identify as Adventist. And so we have done really well with our membership growth, but in some ways that may have been a bit of a price in our cities of not being done. And 5-6 years ago, we looked at this mission opportunity, given what the General Conference did. And the Pacific, where traditionally had been getting a lot of financial support, in the last 5 years was helping for us to tilt the finances to invest in trying to do mission in those 5 or 6 major cities in Australia and New Zealand. And they were happy to forego what would have been normally financial support for their areas because they could see the mission need. And that's what Christina talks about. When you've got a relationship, you trust each other to do what's best for the church, which may not always be best for what could have made you comfortable in your home church or home area, but big picture within the division, that's there. So how do we balance it? Shared vision, mutual trust, and focusing on what really are the big priorities that need to be done in the division. And I think it's marvellous. I'm really happy and I'm very proud of the way that our membership and our administrators respond in the South Pacific Division to some of the ways that we need to sometimes move resources to go with opportunities, and we're seeing that played out continually.
And I think what's amazing, though, is the word that keeps coming back as I listen to you speak is mission, whether we're talking from the sanitarium perspective or from the division or the mission field. And I think that's the string that keeps this whole thing together. And I hope those who are watching can pick this up from this conversation. There's a long contribution here, great insights from the SPD. We really have a challenge taking up the concept of sanitariums in our region, a robust leadership needed in that regard. Not only are the opportunities ripe profit-wise, but as a powerful tool for ministry. I'm hoping it's not only the layman that's following this program right now, but the powers that be. And to the layman, the call is to take up these concepts and possibly invest for the good of the gospel. Thank you, ASI, ZWUC chapter, and ZWUC for this, blah, 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 blah. I think, as you can see, we are challenged by what you have managed to achieve. But let me say one thing before, lest I forget to say this. The one thing that struck me when I was with you, Elder Brady, was when we visited Ellen G. White's home when she was in Australia. And we got a sense of just how enterprising Ellen White was, just how she had a good financial brain and saw way into the future in terms of the opportunities. I mean, you speak of sanitarium. Kevin, we saw the old factory on the Avondale campus, and the fact that she, that land, which is now prime land, a lot of it had to do with Sister White's foresight. So I not many people know that, and it's really great to know that a lot of what we're discussing now, its foundations was actually it finds its foundations in the foresight of Ellen G. White. I thought I'd throw that in. lest people actually not realize that. Just
Actually,
she was a great entrepreneur, and she had a high risk appetite.
high risk appetite.
Christina can take a whole stewardship session on the business initiatives of Alan and James White. She's done that many times. So if you ever need that, she's got a good program on that.
Yeah. Okay. So that's Christina lined up for another podcast.
Another one.
Yeah.
I have
Just
to have
on
that
that.
one as its own one because there's so many good stories to share.
I can imagine, and I believe it. I believe it. A quick one for Kevin. In terms of the legal status of Sanitarium, what is it? A trust? Is it a corporation? How does that work? Just to get an appreciation.
So what the South Pacific Division has done with all of its institutions very wisely has set them up as independent trusts that are controlled by a corporate trustee. And the members and the directors of those corporate trustees are all appointed by the executive committee of the South Pacific Division. And so still the South Pacific Division has full ownership and full control over the entities, but they are in separate legal structures, and that protects the assets of the institution from litigation or claims that may happen in other parts of the church. But it also allows for focus and good governance to be in place for those institutions so that the appropriate direction is given that is institution specific. And so we have a board of directors that is a mix of church administrators and lay people who are church members, most of which who are either successful people in their own right or have had very strong professional careers. And we have an expectation that all our directors contribute strongly to the governance structures of the program overall, and that works very well. It not only protects the church, but it also ensures that there's good oversight and good governance in place, and that the institution is performing in the manner it should do and contributing to both the mission and also the financial aspects of the church too.
Okay, that's very insightful. Maybe just to throw a curveball at you, Kevin. I spent some time with some Australian friends when I was there, and one of them actually works for government, and she wasn't as flattering about the amount of money that Sanitarium makes as maybe a non-profit, and yet at the same time giving all that money away to the church. I'm just giving that other perspective. How do you sort of respond to those? I ask because we have aspirations to do what you're doing. So how do you handle that side of
Well, I think the tension that we do have from time to time with the community is that sometimes there are parts of the community who believes that we should pay tax, income tax, and all charities in Australia are exempt from income tax. And so the amount of money that we would otherwise pay in tax, we of course contribute to the church for the mission of the church overall. And so there's a significant benefit to the church because of our tax status. Of course, the church does use those funds that otherwise will go to the government to forward and invest in the mission of the church overall. And so there are some people that disagree with that position. There's other people that feel quite strongly it's an appropriate position because they recognize the social capital that charities add to countries overall. They often perform a role that the government themselves can't perform efficiently and at a far lower cost than what the government could do if they were to take up those same social mantras and causes themselves. And so I think there is recognition of the value of charities in the in society overall, although there is varying views on whether those charities should have certain exemptions that they have at the moment.
Okay, I think that's well answered, and it does share some insights into that and the possible views that we would come across if we went down that route ourselves. Thanks for that. Maybe just to jump over to some of the comments that we're seeing here. I think there's one that says tremendous effort from the 15% contributing the majority of tithe returned. To God be the glory. That one's for you, Rodney and Christina. I think it's from the graph that you were showing us earlier.
It was, and that we should just add, just to make clear on that, that reflects the income differentials, because if you look at Australia and New Zealand, the incomes there are some of the highest in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've got to remember that it's a small number, but they're very, very high in the world, whereas the Pacific has got some of the lower incomes in the world. So we've got a very big diversity of income. So we should say the 15% are fortunate to have also been very blessed the way they are on their incomes and standard of living.
It comes with responsibility.
Yeah.
Yes, I was going to say it's also a high cost of mission, or to actually do things that have impact. You need to pay a lot of money to actually make an impact. So I think that's something to note. And I think this one's for you, Kevin. With the wisdom and success that you've had in Australia, what are you doing to support similar initiatives in places like Zimbabwe? I promise I didn't plant this one strategically plant. But maybe having said that, let me just quickly make a quick pitch. The simple non-cash investment that you can make is to help us to get on the road to similar initiatives. So Elder Brady knows I'm big on this. So that's the one thing you can immediately answer and say you can do.
They do. Kevin can explain.
Well, we would be happy to give you some advice and some talk to you about what opportunities may exist or not exist in Zimbabwe. We actually have done that in a number of different jurisdictions around the world that are looking at doing different things. But of course, outside of that, we do have operations in China and India, the UK and the USA as well, and so we do operate in some other geographies outside of Australia and New Zealand as well. But certainly, as an organisation, we have supported other parts of the world who are establishing or thinking of establishing food entities, and we can provide advice and just a little bit of guidance to ensure that you don't experience some of the setbacks or invest in things that may not get as good a return as other things and the like. So we'd be happy to give you some support. I've got some very talented people on my team that would be able to give some advice.
Fantastic. That's great news. And maybe a quick one for Christina. How do you handle tithe and offerings in kind in places where that's the norm as opposed to cash, just so that we can see if we can learn something?
So our tithe houses that are next to our local churches are still very commonplace in the Pacific. And so as per the church manual, if people bring crops or produce to the tithe house, the church has two options. The deacons can distribute it to the poor on Sabbath, or they can sell it at the markets that next week and put the money into the tithe and offering. So as per the church manual, so that's still commonplace. And of course, in many of our districts in Papua New Guinea, that is the church's main source of income. So, yeah, don't know what else to add to that other than it's all valid and valued.
Yep.
But I just want to make a comment too, because one of your comments talks about the lay people who have got businesses. Wherever I've travelled in Papua New Guinea and the Pacific Islands, we have incredible business people out there, and some of them make an incredible contribution. So, for instance, when I go to Goroka, I stay in the hotel of a lady who started out as a street cook then took on a restaurant and now owns a hotel and convention centre. So I stay in the hotel of a kingdom business owner, and she's got 5 of the pastors and Bible workers in that mission, which is Eastern Highlands Simbu Mission, on her payroll of her restaurant and convention centre. So it doesn't matter that where I go, I find these people that are incredibly powerful for God, and they make an incredible difference. And we're very blessed as a church to have a lot of them across the SBD. And I think their contribution, I know Sanitarium's exciting, and I've worked with them for 15 to 18 years, and it's a real blessing and a miracle. But I can't emphasize enough the power of God's people who build kingdom businesses in his name to be a blessing. We've got businessmen in Sydney that have built hundreds of churches across the Pacific Islands from their construction companies and their steel companies. And we've got business people everywhere that have said, I'm putting my business in God's hands. I'm going to grow it. My family only needs this to live on, and I'm going to give away the additional for God's purposes. And it's those people that have made the biggest difference in the South Pacific Division, and I encounter them in every economy. And they're still the most powerful thing that the church has, is those believers that say, I'm going to live my life for much more than my own family's needs.
Absolutely, and I think it's a great place to stop this conversation. I see we've run out of time, and the question that's on the screen, I think, partially speaks to what you've been talking about, but I think it's also something that we'll cover in future in the context of planned giving and trust services. So just to let one of our viewers know. I think at this point, allow me to appreciate you so much, all 3 of you. It's almost midnight in your part of the world, and here you are with us, those of us who, it's just after lunchtime, and we really, really appreciate the sacrifice, the insights, and the wisdom that has been shared. And we pray for your territory as well as we ask you to pray for ours. As we enter the new year, praying for more success, and we trust that the same God that's doing great things here will do the great things for you over there. So thanks so much, and appreciation to our viewers who've also given us some great comments and some great insights. Please be sure to join us next month. We've got an interesting program around issues around risk, legal matters, and things like that. We've got Jennifer Woods. I think she's now Woods. She got married from legal counsel at the GC, and a few other people to look at some of those. So that should be exciting. But thanks again to our friends from the South Pacific. Really appreciate you greatly. You notice I said friends, underlined. Thank you so much. Please don't log out straight after this so that we can just have a quick group hug. Thank you so much. And blessings to you all, and happy Sabbath.